Welcome, everyone. So, I thought I'd talk about a topic that um, is likely a bit thorny for people and hopefully interesting, and that is about spiritual healing, teaching, and capitalism. I do enjoy digging into subjects that aren't commonly discussed. And I do recognize that I have a somewhat unique position as somebody who does spiritual healing for a living, and has done so for quite some time, as well as has been a spiritual teacher for a couple of decades now. So I have a bit of time to reflect on this subject and also to offer some insight to others, hopefully, or at least make you a bit curious about the subject. So there are a couple of layers of things that we need to discuss here. And the first is that in some sense, in the modern world, or even in the not so modern world, spiritual healing and teaching um, is in the modern world a part of a capitalist structure. And this arises from the fact that if we traditionally look at shamanism or spiritual healers, ministers, priests, people in positions like that, that there was definitely reciprocity. But if we are talking about an insular community, a community that is quite small, there can be trade there. And so, what this means is that somebody who is a spiritual healer or teacher in their community, in a lot of cases, was given reciprocity for their knowledge, for their efforts, for their healing. It just, if I were to be simple, would say that the price might be two goats instead of, or doing some work for the spiritual healer or teacher, instead of paying them money. And so I find that some people come, especially in the West, to the idea of spiritual healing and teaching with the thought that they shouldn't have to pay anything. Most people are beyond this point. But I will say that there are specific cultures that very much put out this idea of don't pay to pray. And I will respect that for any sort of spiritual healer, teacher, community that wants to bring that thought forward. However, I will say in engaging with spiritual communities and engaging with people that do this work for a living, so not just my own opinion, but many of other people's opinions garnered from doing this work for a living, is that even when the expectation is, okay, anybody is welcome to join, there is an understanding or expectation that if the person values the shaman, the priest, the spiritual healer or teacher, that they would engage in a reciprocal relationship. So even though no fees may be due for a specific ceremony, anybody is welcome, there would be a thought that most people would have the awareness to bring a gift, a monetary donation, or something like that, because they understand that it is not only about the energy and time of the practitioner, it is also about very practical things like supplies, setting things up. Um, and it is also about things like, procuring specific supplies and the time that takes. And on a spiritual level, there is an assumption or an understanding that spiritual healers and teachers have spent a long period of time engaging with themselves, engaging with the divine, specifically in shamanism, creating a relationship with the spirits. And that has significant value. The difficulty with our modern world is that we're dealing with not only the conditioning of capitalism, which is quite heavy, but we are also dealing with an immense amount of spiritual poverty. And that means that people are so out of touch spiritually that what we are conditioned to believe is valuable, is materialistic things. And so even if you look at careers in the arts or having to do with creativity, um, there's been a wide swing yet again for people, devaluing people who have white collar jobs, especially in the United States. And this is part of a massive anti-intellectual movement going on. And perhaps another video, but a widespread energy or mentality where individual opinion is sort of lauded and put on a pedestal over education, over true study, over the experiences of many. Because this is in large part because if you get somebody believing that their uneducated opinions sort of that comes from only their personal experience and doesn't come from anything else, it's sort of in a vacuum, those people are easier to bow down to authority. They're easier to lead. They're easier to kind of put on a path that opposes critical thinking. And that is what people who are in power truly desire. That's why they always go after intellectuals and artists and, people, institutions that are promoting education in communities because um, they want people to just rely on their personal opinion without it having a wider net because the greater connection we have, the greater education we have, the more we engage with critical thinking, the more we experience connection with others. And it's so easy for people in their disconnection to just look at their own personal beliefs and what their emotions want them to believe, um, rather than anything larger than that. Kind of went astray a little bit, but hopefully that's interesting because it's a significant conditioning that is a part of our reality as well, is this energy. I've seen it very heavily for the past 10 years where somebody won't even recognize that their singular opinion does not have the same value as somebody who has spent perhaps their lifetime engaging with study in that area. Um, anyway, that certainly is part of the capitalist structure that puts very few on top and seeks to put everybody else at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's helpful to talk about if you're not already aware of it. So I will say that there are many different thoughts on this subject. I will say, though, that one of the energies that I'm referring to is that this conditioned belief that certain areas of work, certain areas of knowledge are not of value, and therefore that person should be able to take what they want, should be able to feel, receive whatever they want on their own terms without considering the other person or without any sort of thought of reciprocity. Because there's been this warped sense of, oh, it's spiritual, we shouldn't pay for it, sort of thing. And really, that has to do a lot more with how we value spiritual teaching, emotional, spiritual learning, uh, as a whole than it does any sort of history or understanding of um, what actually goes on with people doing this work for a living. I will also mention that many spiritual healers and teachers offer of themselves at varying levels. They are aware that not everybody can afford an individual healing or ceremony ritual with them, and so they will often offer things that range from free to varying levels of payment or reciprocity needed. So for me personally, I will share I have a backlog of a bunch of blogs on my website. I have videos here that are all can be found for free. And then many of my courses are low cost. Many, for example, communal healing sessions. Sometimes I even have scholarship opportunities for people who cannot, afford $24 US or whatever the thought is for those courses. I then, my time on an individual basis is more expensive. Um, but there are books and many offerings that you can find of typically whatever spiritual healer or teacher that you want to have or have interest in these days. And I always advise people to do that because I'm going to tackle the question that I get, what to look for in a spiritual teacher, how do I find one, in a moment, because it's a question that's posed to me quite a bit. But part of that on a practical end is looking at their videos, looking at their free and low cost options and participating in those before you decide if you want to go into a more intensive or one-on-one relationship with that spiritual teacher or healer. So that's definitely from the student to teacher end. The way that quite a number of spiritual healers and teachers structure things is that they typically have a rather wide net. And this can be considered sort of outer teachings and then inner teachings, or an open system and closed system. And so basically what that means is that, for example, in my work, anybody can engage with my videos, my blogs, my books. Anybody can engage with my courses. I will say on rare occasion, and I'll talk about this in a moment, sometimes people do something that truly crosses a boundary, just basically being obnoxious, in which case they're not available to, take even those courses. But I'll say for 99.99% of people, that isn't an issue. Most people are at a point where they're very quite kind and understanding that they are coming into a situation in which there is going to be some form of reciprocity that forms some sort of interaction in which it would be best to treat the teacher or healer that they're interacting with a basic amount of respect and regard. This isn't going to be news to most of you. It is, unfortunately, to some people. And so now we really get to the heart of the matter. In a lot of ways, spiritual healing and teaching is at odds with capitalism. A lot of times people come to me and other spiritual healers expecting that if they have money, sometimes even if they don't, that they expect the time and energy of the spiritual healer or teacher. And there is a dehumanizing effect that happens with capitalism, where people expect if they have enough money, that they will get to purchase whatever they want, the goods that they want, even the people that they want. And that is the dehumanizing part, is that any of us who've experienced this in retail know this, that Most people are quite nice. Some people barely register you, and some people can be quite cruel, entitled, all that sort of stuff. And so that is to be expected in retail. And so I will say that if people were kind, or even if people didn't really register me, I didn't mind, when I was working retail or working in customer service, because quite frankly, I don't need to make a soul connection with each person I was serving a pizza or a beer, or, checking out at a register or something like that. It just doesn't need to happen. Spiritual healing is quite different, though, in that there is intended to be um, a soul bond, a soul connection. And this is, much deeper than the sort of connection if you were to go out to eat and ask your waiter for a beer and some fries, or something like that. This connection at a soul level is really intended to not only transmit energy, but transmit teachings, and in a lot of cases create healing, create an environment that is safe, that is protected, that is heightened by the spiritual practitioner or the spiritual teacher's energy and knowledge. And so when somebody is entering into direct contact with a spiritual teacher or with a spiritual healer, there should be consideration on the part of the student or on the part of a client that things are going to occur, if they occur well, on a very deep, transformative level, on a soul level. And this is totally the opposite of capitalistic instinct and conditioning. Because if somebody comes to me or anybody else, any other spiritual teacher and healer that I promise you has talked about this either publicly or when we get together, in emails and that sort of stuff. Um, if you treat somebody like they are a couch you are going to purchase, or if they just wave enough money in front of you that they are the teacher or healer is going to do whatever your fantastical ideas for them are. You are not you are engaging capitalistically. You are engaging in a system of capitalism. You are not at a point of regarding the humanity of the person, which is essential for things like deeper spiritual teaching and is really required for spiritual healing. And so I will say with spiritual teaching that it is pretty typical, but it can vary, that a lot of spiritual teachers have courses that are open for pretty much anyone. And teachers, especially that have teaching assistants or, are expecting a large group of students, let's say, 20 to 50 students or even more than that. Um, their concern is going to be more about the container of the course, so the energetic field of the course, rather than the individual student. The individual students certainly make up that field, their attitude, their energies, their enthusiasm, all of that stuff go into the field. But when you have a larger course, it is going to be more about managing that field rather than the individual participant. And this is why some spiritual teachers have outer teachings or more public teachings. And then they have closed teachings or more of kind of an inner circle, inner teachings. And these courses or teachings are more for people who do want to go to a deeper spiritual level, that want to have a course container, a field for the course, of course, um, but also who want to more directly interface with the teacher, that want to interface with knowledge and with energy that is not publicly or often offered. Um, and that wishes to have kind of more of a private audience or interaction relationship sort of built with the spiritual teacher or healer. And so at that point, when we ask the question of what to look for a spiritual healer or teacher, my first response is look at their public material, read their books, look at their videos or blogs, that sort of thing. If they have an intro workshop that is low cost or free, take part in that. But if you're looking to seriously study with a teacher, at first the thought is, um, what am I looking for in a teacher? What am I looking for out of the interaction? Um, for example, some spiritual teachers take on the role of spiritual mother or father for people who may still have wounded children within them. Some people inhabit a certain aspect of the divine, dark feminine, dark masculine, light masculine. Those are kind of basic divisions to sort of look for. Sometimes basic interests can be there. Is this person interested in aliens? Are they interested in embodiment? Where am I looking to go with things? But there is a pivot point with that, and that pivot point happens with individual spiritual healing. It also happens with spiritual teachings that become more of a one-on-one experience or a small group experience. Um, and that question that people never ask is, what do I need to do to get to a place that a spiritual healer, a spiritual teacher would want to work with me? I realize in sharing that people's, maybe your mind would be blown, or maybe there would be a source of, kind of uh, rightful kind of anger, because some people will be surprised that, for example, if somebody wants to come and have a spiritual healing session with me, is that I don't accept all people. I only accept people who meet not only my criteria, but my spirit's criteria. I do not work in isolation. And so to get past kind of my basic metrics is the thought of, is this person sincere? Is this person at a point where they really are willing and able to engage with self-awareness and with kind of the deeper sort of layers of themselves? Because if they're not, there are other people out there that may be a better fit for them. I will also say that people who are looking to have me jump through hoops for them, that are looking for a bunch of additional things in addition to the appointment time, the energy and time I already put into my teaching and healing practice, that want to test me. Um, I am a very busy practitioner, and not only do I not have time for that sort of stuff, but that I don't have any animosity towards those people. Typically, people looking to test people to get them to jump through hoops for them are either insecure. For example, we can consider any other relationship where somebody is looking to test their partner to assure that they're not going to cheat on them, or, that they're not going to do anything bad, that sort of thing. It's totally understandable where that person is. I could see it in them and I have empathy for them, but they are not yet at a place where they can understand the sort of spiritual relationship that happens with spiritual healing. They would be better served by therapy, by an in-person relationship that develops over time. And also, part of my work, part of my job is to model health, especially things like healthy boundaries. And so I offer what I offer. And, if somebody, if you are in a relationship with somebody who continually wants to have you jump through hoops to prove yourself to them, that continually wants to test you, there can be a question that a lot of people come to of, is this a healthy relationship or a relationship I want to get into or continue? And for people who are in a place of stability and health within their own system, the answer is going to be no, this is not a relationship I desire to engage in. And it sounds odd, but and not what people want to hear, especially under a capitalist system. But when I say no to them, to somebody, it can be an incredibly healing act if people are really willing to look at the reason why I may have said no. This sort of goes double with people who want to treat me as a couch or don't want to read what I offer. They just want to take from me as much as they can. There are definitely people that contact me in this space, and some of them manage to, despite what you do, some people manage to get through, which is unfortunate. I think that every spiritual teacher and healer has stories about doing the best that they can, and then having a student who or client who either goes off the rails at some point or who engages with such bad faith that they are need to be given a talking to. I will say that most spiritual teachers and healers that I know are fairly no nonsense, and so they're going to talk some sense into people who operate from a sense of bad faith because the spiritual healer or teacher is going to sense that. And they are going to tell them that they are, operating from that place of bad faith. And that is not a place to approach the teacher or approach the spirit's energies that that teacher or healer works with. And so let's take this a bit further because I have some personal boundaries, with people that are similar to boundaries that a lot of spiritual teachers have. Basically, don't be a jerk, don't be entitled, and engage with good faith. That being said, the spirits that I work with have even more requirements. And so, for somebody to get through to somebody who is doing spiritual teaching, spiritual healing, especially if they are coming from a place where they do believe in spiritual reality, they have fostered relationships with the divine, they have fostered relationships with angels, with beings, with deities, with all of those sorts of energies. Some of those energies have different requirements for the type of student or person that wishes to interact or kind of come into the inner sphere of that person. And so none of this is meant to make anybody be like, oh, yeah, I need to be afraid of spiritual teachers and healers. Most people I interact with are quite lovely. They're quite conscious. They're quite genuine. They're quite ready to interact on a deep level. They're ready to look at themselves and the world, and they're just looking for some tools to do so. And those people I'm always really excited to interact with and work with. Basically, if anybody has a degree of sincerity and curiosity, those are, big things. They truly separate people who are going to make progress on their spiritual path versus people who are quite sadly kind of lost causes, so to speak. A lot of people operate in the middle of those things. But so what will I say about spirits is that especially spiritual healers, people doing shamanic work are not operating on their own. They are operating with, to some degree, often a very large degree, under the direction and support of all sorts of energies or a very particular energy or two. And so, what this means is that, for example, I would talk about me and my practice just because it's my experience, but also this is relative to a lot of people that um, are in this position that I have chatted with that do this work for a living. Okay, you go through basically the asshole entitlement check. Okay, you're cleared of that. Now let's look into if the spirits and energies that that the spiritual healer works with can actually be of support and assistance. Are they the right person? And this also extends to spiritual teaching because sometimes people come to me and, you know, they want different things than what I have to offer. Totally understandable. But somebody can get a very good sense of who I am through my videos. I don't present myself any differently than who I am on a regular basis, uh, or in my practice and my work. Only difference is that I go into a deeper trance state when I'm working with people, and I don't share some of my personal practices and personal experiences because they're not for the public. I am quite open otherwise. What you see is what you get, so to speak. Um, so the real question, if we were looking in here, is breaking down not only this notion of capitalism, because there are a lot of spiritual teachers and healers out there that work completely under that capitalist structure. They will take any student. However, quite a few spiritual teachers and healers operate under the structure of they will work with absolutely anybody except for that first line of defense I mentioned, basically not being a jerk, actually holding some sort of respect and regard, not treating the spiritual teacher or healer as a workshop, as like, a sofa, dehumanizing them, or doing the equivalent of walking into an ice cream store and expecting to receive lasagna from them. Those sorts of people are not yet at a point where they can engage with any spiritual teaching, spiritual healing with depth because of a lack of self-awareness. And that is a big one for my spirits, is that somebody needs to have the basic capacity to look within, um, or an interest in looking within in order to sort of meet their perspective. Other people will have other criteria based off of their what spirits, what aspect of the divine that they work with. I will say that though, if we were going to that second line, sort of the inner circle, that there might be more stringent criteria. That sort of old thought of, somebody walking up to a monk's door and knocking every day for a month can still be true in the modern world. We're just so used to this capitalist structure where people are continually expected to sell themselves, that the idea that there are plenty of spiritual healers and teachers that operate from a sense of a soul space, a space of a space of the soul, a space of that is separate from capitalism, is really hard for people to fathom. The idea that somebody may say no to you, that somebody may not, immediately attend to demands and entitlements, or just that Somebody may not be yet at a place in order to accept healing, um, is really hard for people to take in. I will say that earlier on my path, I contacted a shaman and he said, "No, you're not ready for me yet. Here's what you can do." I have said that to plenty of people in my own practice over time. Hey, do this for a month and get back to me. I would say in about 20% of cases people do. I would say in the rest of cases, what people really want is things on their terms now, in the way that they desire, without any consideration of the spiritual realms or what would be best for them overall. That sense of immediate gratification is definitely part of the capitalist instinct. And so part of my job and part of a lot of spiritual healers' jobs is to get people to the point where they can connect enough with spiritual reality that they can regard it as significant, as important, as soul level, as life-changing as it can be. And part of navigating through that is really to look at conditioning of capitalism, look at the way that, there's always this thought of if you want to see the true nature of somebody, look at how they act around a waiter or around service staff. And it's kind of the same sort of thing. How do you look at other people? How do you interact with other people? Is it just about what you want, or does it take into consideration energetic, financial reciprocity as well? So I will end by saying that my opinions that I've shared here are garnered from not only my own practice, but in chatting with a lot of people around the world about their practices as well, as spiritual teachers, as spiritual healers. And so hopefully you've gained something from this, and it will provoke some sort of thought in you and some consideration for those of you who do really want to find a teacher and to move kind of beyond the sort of outer teachings, to recognize that it's going to take a bit of effort on your part, and but it definitely is worth it, and teachers of value definitely are out there, uh, for people with this sort of sincerity and devotion and readiness to find